It was a Tuesday afternoon when everything changed for Maria. The sun was shining through the grocery store windows as she made her way down the cereal aisle, her walking cane tapping gently against the floor. She had been doing her weekly shopping at this same store for 3 years now, and most of the staff knew her by name. Today felt no different than any other day. Maria had cerebral palsy, which affected her movement and sometimes made her speech a bit slower. But she was fiercely independent. At 34, she had built a good life for herself. She worked part-time at the local library, had a loving husband, and despite her challenges, she refused to let anything stop her from living normally. She reached for a box of cereal on the higher shelf. Her balance shifted slightly. This was normal for her. She had learned to adapt to these moments long ago. She steadied herself with her cane and continued shopping, completely unaware that someone was watching her every move. Officer Derek Sullivan had been having a bad day. His shift was almost over, and he hadn't made any arrests yet. His supervisor had been pressuring all the officers to show more activity in their reports. When the call came in about a shoplifting suspect, a black woman in her 30s, Sullivan saw an opportunity. The description was vague, as they often were. Black female, approximately 30 to 40 years old, wearing a dark jacket. Maria happened to be wearing a navy blue sweater that day. To Sullivan, that was close enough. He entered the store with heavy footsteps, his hand resting on his belt, as he scanned the aisles. When he spotted Maria comparing prices on pasta sauce, something clicked in his mind. She fit the description, and in his experience, that was enough to act on. "Excuse me, ma'am," Sullivan called out, his voice carrying an edge of authority that made other shoppers turn their heads. Maria looked up, surprised. She had been focused on reading the nutrition labels, trying to find something that would work for the dinner she planned to cook for her husband that evening. "Yes, officer," she replied, her speech slightly slurred due to her condition but perfectly understandable. "I need to talk to you about some missing merchandise," Sullivan said, stepping closer. His size was intimidating, over 6 feet tall, with a stocky build that seemed to fill the narrow aisle. Maria's face showed genuine confusion. "I'm sorry, I don't understand. What missing merchandise?" "Don't play games with me," Sullivan snapped, his patience already thin. "We got a report about shoplifting and you matched the description." Other customers began to notice the commotion. An elderly man pushed his cart a little closer, pretending to examine soup cans while actually listening. A young mother with her toddler tried to move past them but stopped when she sensed the tension. Maria felt her heart rate increase. She had never been in trouble with the law in her entire life. "Officer, I think there's been a mistake." "I have. My receipt right here for everything I've bought so far." She began reaching into her purse with one hand while maintaining her grip on her cane with the other. "Keep your hands where I can see them," Sullivan barked, causing Maria to freeze mid-motion. The sharpness of his voice made her nervous, and when Maria got nervous, her condition sometimes made her movements more pronounced. Her hand trembled slightly as she tried to keep it visible, while also maintaining her balance. To Sullivan, this looked like suspicious behavior. In his mind, she was either reaching for something she shouldn't have or trying to hide evidence. He had already decided she was guilty. Now he just needed to prove it. "I said don't move," he repeated, stepping even closer. "I'm just trying to get my receipt," Maria explained, her voice showing the strain of trying to remain calm. "I have a disability and I need my cane to keep my balance." But Sullivan either didn't hear her explanation or didn't care. In his 10 years on the force, he had heard every excuse in the book. To him, everyone was guilty until proven innocent, and even then, he often had his doubts. "Turn around and put your hands on the shelf," he ordered. Maria tried to comply, but turning around while maintaining her balance was challenging. Her cane caught on the wheel of someone's abandoned shopping cart, and she stumbled slightly. As she tried to steady herself, her free hand briefly touched the shelf of products. "She's destroying evidence," Sullivan announced loudly, though Maria hadn't touched anything except the metal shelf itself. By now a small crowd had gathered. The store manager, a kind man named Robert who knew Maria well, came rushing over. "Officer, there must be some mistake," Robert said carefully. "This is Maria. She's been shopping here for years. She's never caused any problems." But Sullivan was too far into the situation to back down now. Admitting he was wrong would mean admitting he had made an error in judgment, something his pride wouldn't allow. "Sir, I need you to step back. This is police business," he told Robert firmly. Maria's anxiety was growing by the minute. The crowd, the loud voices, the accusation, it was all overwhelming. When she got overwhelmed, her disability sometimes made her movements more noticeable, which unfortunately made her appear more suspicious to someone who didn't understand her condition. "Please, officer," she tried again. "I can show you my receipt. I can prove I paid for everything." "I've heard enough," Sullivan decided. "You're under arrest for shoplifting and resisting arrest." "Resisting arrest?" Maria repeated in disbelief. "I haven't resisted anything. I've been trying to cooperate." As Sullivan moved to handcuff her, Maria's balance became even more precarious. Without her cane properly positioned, she swayed slightly. Sullivan interpreted this as an attempt to pull away from him. "Stop resisting," he shouted, using more force than necessary to grab her arm. The sudden jerk caused Maria to lose her balance completely. Her cane clattered to the floor as she struggled to stay upright. In her attempt to break her fall, her free hand reached out instinctively. Sullivan saw this as an attack. In his mind, she was reaching for his weapon or trying to strike him. His training kicked in, but it was training filtered through years of seeing threats where none existed. What happened next would haunt Maria for months to come. Sullivan used what he later claimed was necessary force to subdue a resisting suspect. But to everyone watching, including the teenager who had started recording on his phone, it looked like something much different. Maria found herself on the ground, her dignity shattered along with her sense of safety. The cold grocery store floor felt harsh against her cheek as she tried to process what had just happened. The sounds around her became muffled, the gasps from other customers, Robert's voice asking Sullivan to stop, the general chaos of the situation. "My phone?" the teenager called out as Sullivan noticed him recording. "Give me that phone. This is evidence in a police investigation." The teenager, scared of getting in trouble, reluctantly handed over his device. With it went the clearest record of what had really happened in those crucial moments. As Maria lay there, trying to catch her breath and understand how her simple grocery trip had turned into this nightmare, she had no idea that her husband James was at that very moment finishing up his own workday at the Federal Building downtown. He was looking forward to coming home to the dinner she had planned to cook, completely unaware that their lives were about to change forever. The charges were filed quickly: disorderly conduct and resisting arrest. Maria found herself in the back of a police car for the first time in her life, watching the familiar grocery store fade away through the rear window as they drove toward the station. Back at the store, Robert stood in the cereal aisle, looking at Maria's abandoned shopping cart. Her purse was still there, along with the receipt she had been trying to show Sullivan, a receipt that clearly showed she had paid for every single item in her cart. The other customers slowly dispersed, but the weight of what they had witnessed stayed with them. They had seen something that didn't sit right, something that challenged their basic sense of fairness and justice. And somewhere in the police station, Sullivan was filling out his report, crafting a narrative that would justify his actions and protect his career. He had no idea that this particular incident would be different from all the others. He had no idea about the man Maria would call as soon as she was allowed to make her phone call. He had no idea about James Thompson, and he definitely had no idea what James was capable of when someone hurt the woman he loved. James Thompson was reviewing case files when his phone rang. After 15 years as a U.S. Marshal, he could usually tell the difference between routine calls and emergencies just by the ringtone. This one felt different. When he saw Maria's name on the screen at 3 p.m, his stomach dropped. She should have been home from grocery shopping by now. "James?" Maria's voice was shaky, barely above a whisper. "Baby, what's wrong? You sound upset." He immediately pushed his paperwork aside and gave her his full attention. "I'm at the police station," she said, and James felt his world tilt sideways. "They arrested me. They said I was shoplifting, but I wasn't. I have all my receipts." "James, I'm scared." In all their years together, James had never heard this level of fear in his wife's voice. Maria was strong, independent, and rarely let anything shake her confidence, but now she sounded small and broken. "Which station? I'm coming right now." James was already grabbing his keys and badge. "Downtown station on 5th Street. James, the officer, he hurt me. My arm is bruised and my knee is scraped from when I fell." James stopped moving. "When you fell? Maria, what exactly happened?" Through tears, Maria told him everything she could remember. The accusation, the crowd of people watching, the way Officer Sullivan had treated her like she was dangerous when all she wanted was to show her receipt. She told him about losing her balance, about hitting the floor, about the teenager whose phone got taken away. By the time she finished, James was in his car, driving faster than he should have been. His hands gripped the steering wheel so tightly, his knuckles turned white. In his line of work, he had seen plenty of injustice, but this was different. This was his wife. This was the woman who made him coffee every morning and left little notes in his lunch bag. This was the person who had never hurt anyone in her entire life. "Listen to me, Maria," he said, forcing his voice to stay calm and steady. "Don't say anything else to anyone until I get there. Not one word, do you understand? They want me to sign some papers. Don't sign anything. Nothing at all. I'll be there in 10 minutes. James had been a federal law enforcement officer for long enough to know how these situations could spiral out of control. He also knew that his wife's disability made her vulnerable in ways that most people didn't understand. Her speech patterns, her movement difficulties, her need for mobility aids. All of these could be misinterpreted by someone who didn't know better, or worse, by someone who didn't care to know better. When he arrived at the station, James took a deep breath before walking through the doors. He knew he had to be smart about this. One wrong move, one angry outburst, and he could make things worse for Maria. But inside he was burning with a rage he had never felt before. The desk sergeant, a tired-looking man in his 50s, barely looked up when James approached. "I'm here, about Maria Thompson. She was brought in about an hour ago." "Are you her lawyer?" "I'm her husband, James Thompson, U.S. Marshal." James showed his credentials. The sergeant's attitude shifted slightly. Professional courtesy was still a thing in law enforcement, even when the situation was complicated. "She's in processing. Shoplifting and resisting arrest charges. I want to see the arrest report." The sergeant hesitated. "Well, it's still being written up. Then I want to see the arresting officer." 20 minutes later, James found himself face to face with Derek Sullivan. The man was exactly what James had expected: arrogant, defensive, and completely convinced. He had done nothing wrong. "Your wife was acting suspicious," Sullivan explained, leaning back in his chair like he was doing James a favor by talking to him. "She matched the description of a shoplifting suspect, and when I tried to question her, she became combative." "Combative?" James kept his voice level, but every word was carefully measured. "My wife has cerebral palsy. She uses a walking cane. In what way was she combative? She was reaching around, moving erratically, wouldn't follow simple commands." James felt something cold settle in his chest. This officer either had no understanding of disability, or he simply didn't care. Either way, he had hurt Maria, and James was going to make sure there were consequences. "Did you ask her about her disability? People claim all kinds of things to get out of trouble. Did you see her disability placard? Her walking cane? Did you notice any signs that might indicate she was telling the truth?" Sullivan shifted uncomfortably. "Look, Marshal Thompson, I understand this is personal for you, but I followed proper procedure. Your wife was acting suspicious. She resisted arrest, and she's been charged accordingly." James had heard enough. He stood up slowly, and something in his posture made Sullivan sit up straighter. "We're done here," James said quietly. "But this isn't over." When James finally got to see Maria, his heart broke. She was sitting in a small room, still wearing her navy blue sweater, but now it was wrinkled and dirty. There was a scrape on her cheek and a bruise forming on her arm. But it was the look in her eyes that hurt him the most. She looked defeated in a way he had never seen before. "Hey, baby," he said softly, sitting down beside her and pulling her into his arms. Maria started crying again. all the emotion she had been holding back finally spilling over. "James, I don't understand what happened. I was just buying groceries. I had my receipts. I tried to show him, but he wouldn't listen." "I know. I know you did nothing wrong." James held her tight, feeling her tremble against him. "We're going to fix this, okay? I promise you we're going to fix this." It took another 2 hours to get Maria released. The charges were still there. The paperwork had already been filed. But James had used every connection he had to make sure his wife could come home that night instead of spending it in a cell. The drive home was quiet. Maria stared out the window, watching familiar streets pass by. Everything looked the same, but somehow different. She felt like everyone they passed was looking at her, judging her, seeing her as a criminal. "Do you want to talk about it?" James asked gently as they pulled into their driveway. "I keep thinking about all those people watching," Maria said. "The way they looked at me when I was on the ground, like I was some kind of dangerous person." James helped her out of the car, noticing how she moved more carefully than usual. The physical pain was bad enough, but he could see that the emotional trauma was going to be much worse. That night, Maria barely touched her dinner. She kept jumping at small sounds. The refrigerator humming, a car door slamming outside, James moving around in the kitchen. When he suggested they watch their usual Tuesday night show, she just shook her head. "I think I want to go to bed early," she said. But sleep didn't come easily. James lay awake listening to Maria toss and turn beside him. Every few minutes she would make a small sound like she was having a bad dream. When he reached over to comfort her, she flinched away before realizing it was him. "Sorry," she whispered. "I'm just jumpy." "You don't have to apologize for anything," James told her. "What happened today wasn't your fault. But what if it happens again? What if I go out and someone else thinks I look suspicious? What if they don't believe me about my disability?" James didn't have good answers for those questions, and that frustrated him more than anything. He was used to being able to protect people, to solve problems, to make things right. But this was different. This was about changing how people saw his wife, how they treated her, how they judged her before they even knew her. Around 3 in the morning, Maria finally fell asleep, but it was restless and filled with nightmares. James lay there watching her, his mind racing with thoughts of what he was going to do next. He thought about Officer Sullivan, sitting in that chair, so sure he had done the right thing. He thought about the system that had allowed this to happen, that had protected officers like Sullivan before. He thought about all the other people who might be going through the same thing Maria was going through right now. Most of all, he thought about justice. Real justice. Not the kind that came from anger or revenge, but the kind that came from using the system the right way, from being smarter and more patient than the people who had caused this problem in the first place. James had spent his entire career working within the system. He knew how it worked, he knew its weaknesses, and he knew how to make it work for him when he needed it to. Officer Sullivan had picked the wrong family to mess with, but he wouldn't realize that until it was too late. As the sun started to rise, James made himself a cup of coffee and sat at his kitchen table with a legal pad. At the top of the page, he wrote Derek Sullivan and underlined it twice. Then he started making a list. 3 weeks had passed since the incident and Maria still hadn't been back to the grocery store. She had tried twice, making it as far as the parking lot before panic set in and she asked James to turn around. The upcoming court date for her, charges loomed over them like a dark cloud. But James had been busy with something else entirely. Every evening after work, he would disappear into his home office with a cup of coffee and a stack of papers. Maria could hear him on phone calls, speaking in low voices to people she didn't recognize. When she asked what he was working on, he would just kiss her forehead and say, "Don't worry about it, baby. I'm handling things." But Maria did worry. She worried about the court case, about what people would think of her, about whether she would ever feel safe going out alone again. Most of all, she worried about James. He had been different since that day, quieter, more focused, and sometimes she caught him staring off into space with a look in his eyes that she had never seen before. What Maria didn't know was that James had been conducting his own investigation into Officer Derek Sullivan, and what he had found was making him angrier by the day. It started with a simple records request. James had contacts throughout law enforcement, people who owed him favors from his 15 years of federal service. A friend in the police department's records division had quietly pulled Sullivan's personnel file for him. The picture that emerged was disturbing. Sullivan had been on the force for 10 years, and in that time he had racked up an unusual number of complaints. 15 formal complaints in 10 years, with 7 of them involving disabled individuals or people of color. But somehow, every single complaint had been dismissed or resulted in nothing more than additional training. James spread the files across his desk one evening, studying each case carefully. There was Dorothy, a 70-year-old black woman with arthritis who had been arrested for suspicious behavior while waiting for a bus. There was Carlos, a young man with autism, who had been charged with resisting arrest after having a panic attack during a traffic stop. There was Linda, a white woman in a wheelchair who had been cited for blocking pedestrian traffic while trying to navigate a broken sidewalk. The pattern was clear, but what really caught James's attention were the similarities in Sullivan's reports. The same phrases appeared over and over: acting erratically, failed to comply with commands, appeared to be reaching for something. It was like Sullivan had a template for justifying his actions, regardless of what actually happened. But complaints were one thing. James needed proof. His next call was to Tony Martinez, an old friend who worked in the district attorney's office. They had worked together on several federal cases over the years, and James trusted him completely. "Tony, I need a favor," James said during their lunch meeting at a quiet restaurant downtown. "I need to know about any cases involving Officer Derek Sullivan that might not have made it to trial." Tony raised an eyebrow. "This about what happened to Maria?" "Among other things." "James, you know I can't just hand over case files. I'm not asking for files. I'm asking you to tell me if there are any patterns I should know about." Tony was quiet for a long moment, stirring his coffee thoughtfully. Finally, he leaned forward and lowered his voice. "Off the record, Sullivan's cases have a habit of falling apart. Witnesses change their stories. Evidence goes missing. Charges get dropped. It's like someone's been cleaning up after him for years." "Someone like who?" "His partner, Detective Ray Coleman, has a lot of influence in the department. They've been working together for 8 years. Word is Coleman knows where all the bodies are buried, if you know what I mean." James nodded grimly. This was bigger than just one bad cop. This was a system protecting itself. His investigation took on new urgency after that. James started reaching out to the complainants in Sullivan's file, the people whose voices had been ignored by the department's Internal Affairs Division. What he found was a group of people who had been intimidated into silence, convinced that fighting the system was hopeless. Dorothy, the elderly woman who had been arrested at the bus stop, lived in a small apartment across town. When James visited her, she was initially suspicious. "You another cop?" she asked through the chain on her door. "Yes, ma'am, but I'm federal, and I'm here because something similar happened to my wife." Dorothy's expression softened. She let him in and made him tea while she told her story. Sullivan had approached her while she was sitting on a bench waiting for her bus after a doctor's appointment. He claimed she looked suspicious and demanded to see identification. When Dorothy moved slowly due to her arthritis, Sullivan had grabbed her arm roughly and accused her of resisting. "I tried to file a complaint," Dorothy said, her hands shaking slightly as she held her teacup. "But they made me feel like I was the one who did something wrong. Said maybe I misunderstood what happened. Said maybe I was confused because of my age." "Dorothy, would you be willing to tell your story again? If I could guarantee that this time someone would listen?" The elderly woman looked at him for a long moment. "You really think it would make a difference?" "I know it would." James had similar conversations with 5 other people over the next 2 weeks. Each story was different in details but the same in outcome. Sullivan had used excessive force, filed charges that were later dropped, and faced no consequences for his actions. But James knew that witness testimony alone wouldn't be enough. He needed concrete evidence, something that couldn't be dismissed or explained away. That's when he remembered the teenager with the phone. Finding Kevin Chen wasn't difficult. The grocery store manager, Robert, had been happy to help James track down the young man who had been working in the store that day. Kevin was 17, a high school senior who worked part-time bagging groceries after school. When James approached Kevin after his shift, the teenager was nervous at first. "I don't want any trouble," Kevin said. "I gave the cop my phone like," he asked. "I'm not here to get you in trouble," James assured him. "I'm here because that was my wife who got hurt that day. I just want to know what you saw." Kevin's expression changed. That lady with the walking stick? Man, that was messed up. She wasn't doing anything wrong. I've seen her in the store tons of times. She's always super polite. "You recorded some of what happened, right?" "Yeah, but the cop took my phone. Said it was evidence." James nodded. "Did you back up your photos and videos anywhere? A cloud service, maybe?" Kevin's eyes lit up. "Oh man, yeah. Everything on my phone automatically backs up to my cloud account. I completely forgot about that." 20 minutes later, James was watching cell phone footage that showed exactly what had happened that day. The video was shaky and the audio wasn't perfect, but it clearly showed Maria trying to cooperate, Sullivan escalating the situation unnecessarily, and the moment when Maria fell and was treated roughly while she was down. But James needed more than just this one incident. He needed to show a pattern of behavior that went beyond what happened to Maria. His breakthrough came from an unexpected source. Lisa Park, a civil rights attorney who specialized in police misconduct cases, had been following Sullivan's career for years. She had tried to build cases against him before, but had always run into the same problem. Witnesses who were too scared to testify, evidence that mysteriously disappeared, and a department that closed ranks to protect their own. "I've been waiting for someone like you," Lisa told James during their meeting. "Someone with the resources and knowledge to do this right. Most of Sullivan's victims don't have the means to fight back properly." Lisa had been keeping her own files on Sullivan, documenting every complaint, every dismissed case, every pattern of behavior that suggested something deeper was wrong. Together, she and James began building a comprehensive picture of not just Sullivan's misconduct, but the system that had allowed it to continue for so long. "The key is going federal," Lisa explained. "Local internal affairs has been compromised, but if we can show civil rights violations, pattern and practice issues, maybe even conspiracy to deprive people of their constitutional rights, then we can bypass the local system entirely." James felt a spark of hope for the first time in weeks. This was his world: federal law enforcement, civil rights violations, building cases that could actually make a difference. Meanwhile, at home, Maria was slowly starting to heal. She had started seeing a therapist who specialized in trauma, and she was beginning to understand that what had happened to her wasn't her fault. She was also starting to get angry, which her therapist said was a healthy sign. "I keep thinking about all those other people," Maria told James one evening as they sat on their couch. "What if Sullivan has done this to other people? What if they didn't have someone like you to help them?" James took her hand gently. "That's exactly what I've been working on. And Maria, what if I told you that you could help make sure this never happens to anyone else?" Maria looked at him with new determination in her eyes. "What do you need me to do?" "I need you to be brave one more time. I need you to tell your story to people who can actually do something about it. Federal investigators, civil rights attorneys, people who have the power to make real changes." Maria was quiet for a moment, and James could see her wrestling with her fear. Finally, she squeezed his hand. James sat in the conference room at the federal building, surrounded by people who could actually make a difference. 6 weeks had passed since Maria's arrest, and what had started as one man's quest for justice had grown into something much bigger. Special Agent Patricia Wells from the FBI's Civil Rights Division was reviewing the thick file James had compiled. Across from her sat Assistant U.S. Attorney Michael Rodriguez, who specialized in prosecuting law enforcement misconduct. Lisa Park, the civil rights attorney, had her own stack of documents spread across the table. "This is impressive work, Marshal." "Thompson," Agent Wells said, looking up from the file. In 20 years of investigating police misconduct, I've rarely seen such a comprehensive case built by someone outside law enforcement. I had help, James replied, glancing at Lisa. And I had motivation. Michael Rodriguez leaned forward. Let's talk about what we're looking at here. We have a clear pattern of civil rights violations, evidence of a cover-up within the local department, and what appears to be conspiracy to deprive citizens of their constitutional rights. Agent Wells nodded. The video evidence alone is damning. But James, you've given us something even more valuable. You've shown us the system that allowed this to happen. What James had uncovered went far beyond Derek Sullivan's individual actions. His investigation had revealed a network of protection that included Sullivan's partner Ray Coleman, several supervisors who had consistently dismissed complaints, and even connections to the local prosecutor's office that explained why charges against Sullivan's victims were routinely dropped. The key breakthrough came when we found the overtime records, Lisa explained to the group. Sullivan has been claiming overtime for court appearances in cases that were dismissed before trial. Someone's been signing off on those payments. James had discovered this piece almost by accident. While reviewing Sullivan's personnel file, he had noticed unusual patterns in the officer's overtime claims. Sullivan was reporting court time for cases that had been dropped, training sessions that didn't exist, and community policing hours that no one could verify. It's not just about the money, James explained. It's about the paperwork trail. Someone had to approve all these false claims. Someone had to know they were fake. Agent Wells made a note. Fraud, conspiracy, civil rights violations. We're looking at federal charges that could put multiple people behind bars. But the most important evidence was still Kevin Chen's video. The teenager had been nervous about getting involved, but when James explained how the video could help other people avoid what happened to Maria, Kevin had agreed to cooperate. The video shows everything, Michael Rodriguez said. Sullivan escalating the situation, your wife trying to comply despite her disability, the unnecessary use of force. But more importantly, it shows Sullivan's mindset. He had decided she was guilty before he even talked to her. James felt a mix of satisfaction and anger as he watched the prosecutor review the evidence. This was what justice looked like. Not revenge, not vigilante action, but careful, methodical work within the system to hold people accountable. What about the other victims? James asked. Dorothy, Carlos, the others who filed complaints? They're all willing to testify now, Lisa reported. Amazing what happens when people believe someone is actually listening to them. Agent Wells smiled grimly. Sullivan picked the wrong family to mess with. But James, you understand this is going to get ugly, right? The local department isn't going to just roll over, they're going to fight back. James had already seen signs of this. Word had somehow gotten out that he was investigating Sullivan, and the pressure had started almost immediately. His supervisor at the Marshal's office had called him in for a friendly chat about being careful with his extracurricular activities. A few colleagues had started treating him differently, like he had broken some unwritten rule about not going after other cops. Let them fight, James said quietly. I've got right on my side, and I've got evidence they can't make disappear. The meeting continued for another hour, with the team laying out their strategy. They would start with Sullivan but work their way up the chain. The goal wasn't just to punish one bad cop. It was to force systemic change in how the department handled misconduct complaints. Timeline? Agent Wells asked. We move fast, Michael Rodriguez replied. The longer we wait, the more time they have to destroy evidence or intimidate witnesses. I want arrest warrants within 2 weeks. As James drove home that evening, he felt something he hadn't experienced in weeks. Hope. Real, concrete hope. That justice would be served. At home, Maria was in the kitchen, actually cooking dinner for the first time since the incident. The smell of her famous beef stew filled the house, and James realized how much he had missed this simple normalcy. How did it go? She asked, stirring the pot without looking at him. Good. Really good. They're taking the case. Maria turned to face him, and James could see both relief and fear in her eyes. What happens now? Now we wait, and we stay strong. Because things might get complicated before they get better. Maria nodded slowly. James, I need to tell you. Something. I've been thinking about what happened and I've been angry. Really angry. Not just at that officer, but at the whole situation. That's healthy, baby. Your therapist said anger was part of the healing process. But I've also been thinking about all those other people. The ones who went through what I went through but didn't have someone like you to help them. Maria's voice got stronger as she spoke. I want to do something about it. James smiled, recognizing the determination in his wife's voice that had attracted him to her in the first place. What did you have in mind? I want to start a support group. For people who've been mistreated by police but were too scared to speak up. I want them to know they're not alone. Maria, that's a beautiful idea. But are you sure you're ready for that kind of attention? I'm sure. Dr. Williams thinks it would be good for my recovery too. She says helping others can help me process my own trauma. Over the next week, James watched his wife transform. The scared, traumatized woman who couldn't go to the grocery store was becoming an advocate for justice. She started reaching out to the other victims in Sullivan's file, offering support and encouragement. Dorothy, the elderly woman from the bus stop, was the first to join Maria's informal support group. Then Carlos, the young man with autism. Soon, Maria's living room was filled with people who had similar stories of mistreatment and official indifference. It's amazing, Maria told James one evening after the group had left. All these people thought they were alone, that what happened to them was somehow their fault. But when we talk together, we realize it's not us. It's the system that failed us. Meanwhile, James's investigation was having effects beyond what he had expected. Word was spreading through the law enforcement community about the federal case being built against Sullivan. Some officers were supportive, telling James privately that they were glad someone was finally dealing with the bad apples who made all cops look bad. But others were less supportive. James started noticing he was being excluded from certain meetings that some colleagues avoided him in the hallways. One afternoon, his longtime partner, Detective Angela Torres, pulled him aside. James, you need to be careful, she said quietly. There are people saying you're going too far, that you're betraying the brotherhood. What brotherhood protects cops who hurt disabled women? James replied. I'm not saying they're right, I'm saying you need to watch your back. Sullivan has friends, and they're not happy about what you're doing. That evening, James found his car with slashed tires in the federal building parking garage. There was no note, no direct threat, but the message was clear. He reported the incident to building security but didn't tell Maria about it. She had enough to worry about. 2 days later, Agent Wells called with news that changed everything. James, we've got him, and it's bigger than we thought. What do you mean? Sullivan's been running his own little side business. Remember those overtime claims? He's been getting paid for security work at private events while claiming to be on police duty. We're talking about fraud in the tens of thousands of dollars. And his partner Coleman has been helping him cover it up. We've got bank records, false timesheets, the whole thing. This isn't just about civil rights violations anymore. This is organized fraud involving multiple officers. James felt a surge of satisfaction. This was how you brought down corruption, not through violence or revenge, but through careful investigation and following the money trail. When do we move? Tomorrow morning. Multiple arrests, coordinated raids. James, you did it. You actually did it. That night, James held Maria close as they watched the evening news. Tomorrow, their lives would change again. But this time, it would be by choice, not because someone had hurt them. Are you ready for this? He asked her. I'm ready, Maria replied. For the first time in weeks, I feel like myself again, like I have some control over what happens next. Whatever happens tomorrow, whatever comes after, I want you to know how proud I am of you. We did this together, Maria said. All of it. The investigation, the support group, fighting back, we did it together. James smiled in the darkness. Tomorrow, Derek Sullivan would face justice, but tonight, the morning of the arrest, James woke up before his alarm. It was 5:30 a.m. and he could hear the rain still pattering against the bedroom window. In 2 hours, federal agents would be knocking on Derek Sullivan's door. After 3 months of investigation, planning and building the case. Today was the day everything would come together. Maria was already awake, sitting up in bed with her laptop open. Over the past few weeks, she had become something of a social media expert, using online platforms to connect with other victims of police misconduct across the country. "Couldn't sleep either?" James asked, sitting up beside her. "I keep thinking about Dorothy," Maria replied, closing the laptop. "She called me last night, you know. She's never seen a police officer face real consequences for anything. She said she didn't think this day would ever come." James understood that feeling. In his 15 years in law enforcement, he had seen too many cases where officers who crossed the line faced nothing more than a slap on the wrist. But this time was different. This time they had done everything right. At 7:45 a.m., James's phone rang. It was Agent Wells. "We've got him," she said simply. Sullivan was arrested at his home 20 minutes ago. No resistance, no drama. Coleman was picked up at the same time. 3 other officers are being brought in for questioning. James felt a wave of relief wash over him. "What about the charges?" "Federal civil rights violations, conspiracy to deprive citizens of constitutional rights, fraud, filing false police reports, and about 6 other charges. Sullivan's looking at 20 years minimum if convicted." "And Coleman?" 15 years. The prosecutors are confident they can get convictions on all the major charges. After hanging up, James turned to Maria, who had been listening to his side of the conversation. "It's over," he said quietly. "Sullivan's been arrested." Maria didn't say anything for a long moment. Then tears started rolling down her cheeks. "Why am I crying?" she asked, laughing a little through the tears. "I should be happy." "You are happy," James said, pulling her close. "Sometimes our emotions just need to catch up with our brains." By noon, the news was everywhere. Local television stations had picked up the story of the federal arrests, and James's phone hadn't stopped ringing. Reporters wanted interviews. His colleagues wanted details, and victim advocacy groups wanted to know how they could replicate what he had done. But the most important call came from Lisa Park, the civil rights attorney. "James, the city wants to settle," she said. "They're offering a substantial amount to Maria and the other victims, and they're agreeing to a federal consent decree that will completely reform how the police department handles misconduct complaints." "How substantial?" 7 figures for Maria, 6 figures for each of the other victims, plus funding for sensitivity training, an independent oversight board, and body cameras for all officers. James was quiet for a moment, processing the information. "What does Maria think?" "I haven't called her yet. I wanted to talk to you first." "Lisa, this isn't my decision. It's hers." When James told Maria about the settlement offer, her reaction surprised him. "I don't want their money," she said immediately. "I mean, I do, but that's not what this was about." "Then what do you want?" "I want to make sure this never happens to anyone else. The money is nice, but what matters is the changes they're agreeing to make." That afternoon, Maria called a meeting of her support group. The living room was packed with people whose lives had been changed by police misconduct. Dorothy with her arthritis, Carlos who had autism, Linda in her wheelchair, and 7 others who had found their voices through Maria's encouragement. "I wanted you all to hear this from me," Maria told the group. "The officer who hurt me has been arrested. The federal government is charging him with serious crimes, and the city is agreeing to make changes to prevent this from happening again." Room erupted in applause and tears. Dorothy stood up slowly, using her cane for support. "Maria, honey," she said, her voice shaking with emotion, "you did something none of us thought was possible. You made them listen." "We did it together," Maria replied. "Every person in this room made this happen by being brave enough to speak up." The legal proceedings moved quickly after that. Sullivan's case became a national story, covered by major news networks and civil rights organizations. The video that Kevin Chen had recorded became Exhibit A in the federal prosecution, showing the world exactly what had happened that day in the grocery store. Sullivan's lawyer tried to negotiate a plea deal, but the prosecutors weren't interested in anything less than serious prison time. The evidence was too strong, the pattern of abuse too clear, and the public attention too intense for a slap on the wrist. 6 months after his arrest, Derek Sullivan stood in federal court and pleaded guilty to all charges. The judge sentenced him to 18 years in federal prison. His partner Coleman received 12 years. 3 other officers were fired and faced lesser charges. But for Maria and James, the real victory wasn't Sullivan's conviction. It was what happened after. The city followed through on its promise to reform the police department. An independent oversight board was established, with Maria serving as one of its civilian members. Every officer was required to complete 40 hours of disability awareness training. Body cameras became mandatory for all interactions with the public. Maria's support group evolved into a formal nonprofit organization called Voices for Justice. They provided resources for people who had experienced police misconduct and helped them navigate the complex process of filing complaints and seeking justice. The amazing thing, Maria told a reporter 6 months after Sullivan's sentencing, is how many people have been helped by speaking up. We've assisted over 200 families in filing formal complaints, and 23 officers have faced disciplinary action because of our work. James watched his wife during that interview, marveling at her transformation. The scared woman, who couldn't go to the grocery store, had become a national advocate for civil rights and police accountability. His own career had taken an unexpected turn as well. The federal government had recognized his work on the Sullivan case and offered him a position heading a new task force on law enforcement accountability. It meant investigating cases of police misconduct across multiple states, working to identify patterns of abuse before they escalated. I used to think justice was about catching bad guys, James reflected during his first day in the new position. Now I understand it's about preventing bad things from happening in the first place. The grocery store where everything began installed a memorial plaque near the entrance, honoring all victims of police misconduct and reminding shoppers that everyone deserves to be treated with dignity and respect. Maria finally felt comfortable shopping there again, though she admitted the first few visits were difficult. 1 year after Sullivan's arrest, Maria and James were invited to speak at a national conference on disability rights. Standing at the podium looking out at an audience of advocates, lawyers, and activists, Maria felt a sense of purpose she had never experienced before. "A year ago, I was just a woman trying to buy groceries," she began. "I never wanted to be an activist or a public speaker, but sometimes life forces you to become something you never expected to be." She paused, looking at James in the front row. "The most important thing I've learned is that justice isn't something that just happens. It's something you have to fight for carefully and intelligently, using every tool the system gives you. My husband taught me that patience and persistence are more powerful than anger and revenge." After her speech, a young woman approached Maria. She was in a wheelchair and had tears in her eyes. "Thank you," she said simply. "Last month, an officer was rude to me during a traffic stop, and I thought there was nothing I could do about it. But after hearing your story, I filed a complaint. The department is investigating, and they're taking it seriously." "That's what this is all about," Maria replied, taking the woman's hand, making sure every person knows their voice matters. As they drove home that evening, James reached over and took Maria's hand. "Any regrets?" he asked. "About what?" "About how we handled everything. About not just letting it go." Maria was quiet, for a moment, watching the city lights pass by their car window. "The only thing I regret," she said finally, "is that it took something bad happening to me to realize how many other people were suffering in silence. But James, we turned something terrible into something good. We gave other people hope. We made the system work the way it's supposed to work. And Sullivan? Sullivan is where he belongs, in prison thinking about what he did and why it was wrong. Maybe he'll even learn something." James smiled, thinking about how far they had both come. The scared, angry man who had wanted nothing more than to make someone pay for hurting his wife had learned that real justice was about more than punishment. It was about healing, change, and making sure that others didn't have to endure what they had endured. "You know what the best part is?" Maria said as they pulled into their driveway. "What's that?" Tomorrow is a new day, and somewhere out there, someone who might have given up on justice will hear our story and decide to keep fighting. That's how change really happens. One person at a time, one case at a time, one victory at a time. That night, as they lay in bed,